Once again, it is time for another game theory video. And I'm going to talk about what is the most hated thing, technique, whatever you might call it, in fighting games, in the history of fighting games. And you want to know what the most hated thing ever in fighting games is? Technique. The most hated variable. It's the fact that a fighting game is a two-player game. It's the fact of that there's a human element to fighting games. The fact that someone else can guess and you have absolutely no control over it, right? Once again, if you like these kind of videos, remember, leave a like if you could. Comment on it, whatever. Even if it's a bullshit comment, it helps. But game theory video, I want to talk about this, right? And I'm going to blow your mind as usual about just how goddamn smart I am, right? So let's talk about this, right? And I'm going to compare this to a lot of different video games in the fighting game genre, right? And you're going to see just about how true this is and how this shows the hypocrisy of the fighting game community in general, right? So while you think about this entire conversation that we're about to have, this discussion, or me whispering to you, I want you to keep the word guess in your head. Think about the word guess while we talk about all this, okay? So let's start off at a game, and we're going to use many different games. Let's start off a game like Street Fighter 2. What is one of the main complaints about a game like Street Fighter 2 in the history of fighting games? People hate and hated, not everyone, but there's a complaint from a certain Jimmy group, a certain group of nerds, that they hate the idea that a DP has so much influence over a match, right? And it's not the DP that's an anti-air. It's the DP of walking up and throwing the guy, walking up and DPing the guy. Okay? A guess. A simple guess has such a huge influence on the match, right? Which is funny then too, because if we also think about fighting games, Daigo, one of the most famous fighting game players of all time, he was loved for his ability to guess well, right? You know, his random psychic DPs, right? That's some crazy hypocrisy for you there. The dude becomes famous because he's so good at it. Yet it's also one of the main things these nerds complain about, that guessing has such a influence over the match, something so simple. And of course, as games went on, games become more complicated, you know, unnecessary evil combos are becoming bigger and bigger. But I talk about this in other game theory videos. I'm going to focus on the word guessing here, okay? Let's get to a game like Street Fighter Alpha. What is a reason that Street Fighter Alpha 1 is seen as a clusterfuck game? Why talk about it in my Street Fighter Alpha video? Because 99% of everything is rollable in that game. In every roll, you have to commit to a big roll. And every roll leaves your guys standing. So they are also punished extremely hard, right? So let's think about this. Again, roll with me here. So rolling was added because, you know, in old Super Turbo games or whatever, people don't want to deal with setups. They want to be able to try to potentially get out of something. Oh, I don't want to be knocked down, deal with this fireball trap or this throw loop, and then I might lose to a guess because a guess has such a big influence on the match. But then look at what a big influence on the match a guess has in Street Fighter Alpha. So in Street Fighter Alpha, they added a guess for the defender. So do you want to take this potential juggle combo? Do you want to fall down and potentially, you know, then deal with the fireball trap? Or do you roll? But the roll, again, is so ridiculously punishable. It's like kind of weak. It's like flipping a coin. I showed the coin flip theory again in the Alpha 1 video. Watch it. It's like, wow, I'm trying to get out of this. Capcom has given me a chance to get out of this mix-up or this pressure, but the guess, I might lose the match instantly because of a guess. Either way, it's 50-50. So there's an example of a guess still having, from that perspective, too much influence on a match, and it pissed people off, right? Look at a game like Street Fighter Alpha 2. Let's compare this to Street Fighter Alpha 2, one of the most hypocritically liked games in the history of fighting games, right? It's an extremely hypocritical game. What did they do for this game, though, right? Let's talk about this. And I'm not trying to suck Alpha 2's cock because I don't care about Alpha 2 per se. But so Alpha 2, what did they do? Of course, things like DPs started getting toned down. A lot of fundamental stuff, important stuff to Street Fighter got toned down. So that kind of idea of guessing doesn't have as big of an influence on the match. Excuse me. Now when you roll, they had a little punch roll. So the little punch roll was not as punishable. So then the Jimmy likes this. They're like, oh my God, so wait. For me now to get out of this pressure, I can do a little punch roll that now I'm not as punished by. Now they're actually, the guessing of this, now me guessing to get out of pressure, the guess is way in my favor to little punch roll, right? Because I don't have to commit myself, right? And also then we have things like, oh, people complain about custom combos, but from a certain perspective, the custom combo guess, custom combos are broken, but the custom combo guess requires a lot of meter, right? The guess requires resources, right? I think that's why some people think that Alpha 2 is a quotation marks good game. I'm rolling my eyes right now if you could see me, but it's extremely hypocritically made game. But the guessing in that game, I think I think Alpha 2 appeals to sort of fake OGs, generally speaking, that don't like guessing. Does that make sense? Because they're like, oh, guessing doesn't have as big as an influence on this match and in this game. And when you do guess, it is often very meter extensive, right? To guess, right? Let's look at another game. What is one of the most hated things in CVS2? Roll canceling, of course, roll canceling, but it's roll throw, roll super, a guess. You have no control over if your opponent is going to roll and throw you or roll and guessing. I mean, you can punish the roll, of course, but there's this idea. Is this not a very commonly complained thing about an Alpha 2? God, I hate roll throw. I hate roll super. It's so stupid. That's a human aspect of the game that you can't control, right? Look at a game like Karno's Revenge. I've used a game like Karno's Revenge before. A very volatile game. You might guess wrong one thing to a DP. Boom, you lost the match. Guessing potentially has a very large influence on the match. The human aspect of the match, right? Let's go farther to a game like Dragon Ball FighterZ. Dragon Ball FighterZ is so far removed from what video games are old video games are, Street Fighter wise, etc., right? So much set play, all this kind of bullshit, right? So much math problems, so much predetermined, all this kind of thing. But what is one of the most hated things about Dragon Ball FighterZ? Homing dash. The game where everyone was like, oh, there's no mix-up. But you know what is one mix-up that everyone gets talked about from a certain perspective? It's homing dash, right? People are like, oh God, I blocked everything, but then I got opened up by the homing dash. Homing dash tracked me, blah, 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 blah. Homing dash is, in a way, the human aspect of Dragon Ball FighterZ. In a game that is so ridiculously pre-planned and predetermined, homing dash is a human element of Dragon Ball FighterZ because you can homing dash whenever you want. I can be jumping at you. I can be air dashing back. I can be calling assist. I can homing dash at you whenever the fuck I want, dude. And you can't control it. Now, of course, it's very annoying from a certain perspective, gameplay-wise, when you think that, oh God, every character now has the most powerful quotation marks mix-up, right? Because homing dash is it's all around the board. It's not like a character like, oh God, a Shoto or whatever it might be. He is this really annoying mix-up of, DP because they have easy access to this sort of potential guessing game, right? Now in a game like Dragon Ball FighterZ, you have, homing dash. You can do it whenever. I can't control it. I fucking hate this, right? Not saying I hate it per se, but, this is the narrative, right? And like I said, this is always so hypocritical because this just goes to show you, like what I've always tried to say, like, people hate the human aspect of video games. They hate that fighting games are two players. So many of these jimmies are trying to, and the companies are trying to turn video games into a math problem. Every game is so pre-planned and predetermined. This move has to do this move has to do that, blah, 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 blah. The destruction of the fundamentals in fighting games all around. It's absolutely ridiculous. We have this idea of, set play, so I can lab all my, my setups, my guaranteed setups, blah, blah. This is my set play, blah, 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 blah. Right? taking out all the creativity of games. And yet, look at the hypocrisy of this. Daigo, one of the most famous, video game dudes, fighting games of all time, was known for his good guessing. Isn't that interesting if you think about that? The community hates guessing, but Daigo was made famous because of his guessing. Of course, he's won tournaments, of course, too, but you know what I mean, right? Isn't that interesting? Look at a game like Guilty Gear. Guilty Gear did not take off in the eyes of the fighting game community until these fundamental aspects of Street Fighter became apparent in Guilty Gear. Watch How the Dust Loop saved Guilty Gear, because you saw that human aspect of Street Fighter and fighting games in general, back then, right? That a guest could have so much influence on a match. And to make the guest have a lot of influence on the match, you had to learn Guilty Gear from your guest while you were doing it, right? Which is, it's like a perfect storm for the game, right? Isn't that interesting? All these vocal nerds that hate guessing and all this other kind of stuff. Guessing, Daigo might be their favorite player. Guilty Gear, these nerds, Guilty Gear wasn't even a popular series until guessing had an influence on the match like that, right? Do you think that before in Guilty Gear, that Guilty Gear caught on because of FDC canceling? No, of course not, right? That's not what made Guilty Gear popular, dude. It's not at all, right? So anyway, you know what people hate? People like guessing. But people don't like when their guess isn't right or the other person guessed right and they didn't. That's what people don't like. People hate the human aspect of games. Anyway, game theory video. Remember, if you like the videos, like, sub, comment, even if it's a bullshit comment, it helps the channel. The end.